Chapter 42. The rough band of rebels traipsed up a forest trail, winding up towards the mountains. As the column turned up the switchbacks, they afforded Ray a better view of the line of marching guerrillas behind her. They told her she'd been in an accident. Strange. It didn't seem like that. There had been a wrecked transporter, that was true, and she ached in many places. And really, if she thought about it, how else could she explain what was happening? Even so, it didn't ring true. Ray went over it again. A transporter she'd been in, up there, in the sky, flying about, had actually crashed, with her inside it. No, still not registering. The reason it didn't add up was that Ray's mood just didn't match the facts. On the face of things, she was a victim, unemployed, friendless, dismissed from the corporatocracy to the RMZ. And now she'd been in an air crash. She ought to feel scared. A helpless wretch subjected to the cruel whims of powers much greater than her. But, truth be told, since coming to, she'd been quite chipper. Perhaps she'd banged her head during the crash. It felt okay, a bit sore, nothing major. It was like she'd woken up in this mood. Something residual from her sleep. It was difficult to say. So much was happening. Still, she had a sense of something she couldn't quite put her finger on. As the line of guerrillas continued up the mountain, the trail got steeper. It was hard going, but Ray found it pleasant to be out in the fresh air, a hike up through a pine forest with a band of exiled rebels. Quite romantic, really. She'd survived a catastrophic air accident, and although she didn't exactly have her freedom, it did feel liberating to be out in the wilderness, amongst these other outcasts. After all, Ray had only ever been in the city, her entire life spent penned in by concrete and tarmac, the horizon only ever a few dozen metres away. People everywhere, all the time. Adverts, always adverts. Ray hadn't seen one advert since she'd come to. She'd seen plenty of trees and moss, felt old pine needles underfoot, soft and generous, the odd slippery mushroom. There were birds and ferns and rotting tree trunks mixing their musk with the brisk mountain air. There were little plants with tiny little leaves and bright red berries. There was soft green light and sunshine dappling whatever it could. There were no names for things here, not for Ray, just things. The little birds blinking about the bushes were just that, little birds. Some flashed a bit of yellow here and there, some didn't. Funny, fast little buggers. She'd no idea what to call them, nor did she know what the luscious tufts of long grass shooting up around the boulders were exactly, nor the mossy stuff bearding the branches, nor the trees themselves. She thought she probably knew those were birch trees over there. Their papery white bark stood out amongst the greens and browns, but apart from that, she didn't know what to call anything. And it didn't seem to matter. The stones and birds and trees didn't care. Why should she? On they marched, always upwards. The trail steepened, her thighs burned. After a few hours, they reached a mountain pass, a sparse stretch of country slung between the peaks. Boulders scattered the landscape, barren and naked, above the tree line. It was too exposed for the rebel militia, and they shuffled furtively ahead, keen to get back down to the cover of the forest below. But with exposed heights come exceptional vistas, and Ray was utterly astounded by the magnificence of the mountains. She walked on, gawping at the peaks, hauling themselves up in their great granite glory. It was too much. Ray couldn't keep it bottled up any longer, and she started pointing things out to the guard marching close behind her. And those craggy pinnacles twisting up over there, just wow. And way down there, those valleys. Oh, they're called gorges. Those gorges are so damn deep. Those gorges are gorgeous. And those caves, look at the size of those fucking caves. And oh shit, are we going down that way? Tell me we're going down that way. That looks amazing. And on she went for the rest of the afternoon, descending back down into the forest, chatting giddily to her guard, pointing out each fascinating feature she spotted along the way. For Ray, it was a spirit-enriching nature ramble. For her guard, who'd seen it all 1,000 times before, it was a long bloody march back. Despite the guard's reluctance to chat with her, Ray entered the camp feeling buoyant and optimistic. Dusk began drawing the daylight away, and as the company marched into the web of camouflaged tarpaulins stretched between the trees, the sky dimmed grey above the canopy. To the relief of her guard, Ray was dispatched from his care to a command tent. He scurried away before anyone changed their minds and ordered him otherwise. Taking in the camp, Ray wondered which section of the remilitarized zone this was. It was surreal to find herself in such a notorious location. Christ, her parents had even brought her on an excursion once. Just a bus tour, nothing fancy, but still. And here she was, with a troop of exiles, of which it was dawning on her she was now one. Kind of. The rational part of her tried to point out how unbelievably dangerous this was, but she was having none of it. Perhaps these guys had the right idea. She certainly liked it out here in the wild. Which section of the RMC was this, though? Ray wondered. She didn't think this lot were organised criminals. Their kit was too military. And they weren't quite ugly enough. The Belgo Rus mob, for example, were a horrid bunch of thugs whose attraction to most tourists was that they looked fantastic when they got shot. They pulled the perfect grimaces when clients mowed them down. The mob also liked guns, big ones, and a lot of them. It was hard to think of anything more satisfying than gunning down a horrid great hooligan as he sprayed bullets from as many machine guns as he could hold. The war cry of an impassioned gangster making his last stand, guns blazing, face liberally dusted in cocaine derivatives, was worth its weight in gold. Big ticket packages that sold for preposterous sums. More experienced tourists usually skipped the gangsters, though. They were too easy. Criminals weren't given to military combat, being more accustomed to small-scale stuff. Planting bombs under people's cars, beating up small business owners, having affairs with each other's wives, and sticking their faces in great piles of powdery stimulants before robbing a bank. Their leather shoes may have been stylish, but they were far too slippery to get any traction on the battleground. Perhaps then Ray speculated she'd ended up in a religious zone. There were a decent number of religious fundamentalists exiled to the RMZ too. Such a divided bunch. Most excursions arrived to find the different faiths already attacking one another, tearing each other limb from limb in a craven attempt to wreak some holy war or other. These settings attracted the more strategically minded tourist, who preferred directing the fundamentalists in their violence against each other, rather than getting their hands dirty themselves. But Ray wasn't getting the religious vibe of these guys. If she had to guess, gun to her head, so to speak, then she'd say they were probably political freedom fighters. Seasoned tourists tended to go for political opponents. You got more bang for your buck. Groups like the neo-sociologists, the tantric revisionistas, and the various arms of the radical homeopathic army were fine opponents, reliably passionate about their beliefs, yet able to curb that passion with an educated, rational approach. Such targets weren't as mindless as the religious groups, nor as unorganised as the ones from the organised crime scene. Sweeping the canvas door of the tent aside, Ray hoped it was something political. Considering the injustices she'd suffered at the hands of the fucking corporations, she could get behind the right kind of movement.